The Wednesday Night Info Show.
All right, y'all, so here's the deal. You've probably heard the phrase, practice makes perfect. I disagree. I'm always going to make mistakes. And once I got used to making mistakes, I actually found that practice was a lot more helpful. You see, practice does build precision. Practice does blah, blah, blah. All that kind of stuff. You've heard it all before. But most importantly, practice builds performance because it gets you to the point where you're so used to making mistakes, you realize they're happy accidents, as the painter Bob Ross used to say, and you figure out how to incorporate that in what's going on. In other words, I don't have to be perfect, but I do have to practice. And this is how I do it. This is how I do it. Na 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 na. I was hanging out with a friend of mine the other day, and he mentioned that I was apparently improving my skill on guitar. And the truth of the matter is, I do play much more than I used to. But the way that I play is very different. The first 5 minutes that I'm sitting at the desk, I do nothing but work on scales and patterns that I'm not very good at. It's a little mind-numbing, but I promise myself, just do 5 good minutes. 5 minutes working on hand dexterity, 5 minutes working my way around the neck, 5 minutes working on things that I don't do well, different patterns that I can hopefully incorporate into a lead structure, different keys, trying out different things so I'm not always playing the same shapes, the same phrasing in the same keys. And then for the last minute, I just kind of mix it up. Now, one of my newest additions to my practice time is I actually have some cards that have some basic chord structures. And I shuffle them up just like you would any other deck of cards. And then I deal out about 4 and just practice those chords and see if I can't work out something that seems reasonably like a transition. Now, as this goes on, I'm going to take some of those chords out because they just don't fit. And eventually, I try to end up with about 3 or 4 chords that can put together a fairly decent transition. Now, this is a way for me to practice different chord structures than ones that I normally use. Practice different progressions. Try to hear things. Tonight, for example, the cards that came up were all minors and minor 7s. And so this is kind of new. But as you end up with minor 6s and minor 7s, I can shuffle cards in and out of the pattern. This is helping me not only learn the names of these, but also learn how their structures relate to each other. When it's easier to play one chord versus another because you're barring the 3rd fret, versus having to go from a bar on the 1st fret to a bar on the 3rd. And then as it gets closer to working into a workable pattern, I start to subtract cards. This is all done by ear. If I had taken the time to learn theory better, this would not be nearly as complicated. if I had taken the time to really develop my training as far as being able to read an actual stanza in notated music. I wouldn't have to rely on these finger chord structures. I wouldn't have to rely on shapes. I'd know it by the notes. And I'm learning. I'm learning my way around the fretboard because I want to get better. This part takes a while. The recording that you're watching is sped up to 8 times faster. It's about 25 to 27 minutes in addition to the 5 minutes that I spent practicing scales. And it's one of the reasons I had to shift to minis is to be able to voice these chords. But eventually, after all of the wrestling around, I can come up with a progression that's something that I'm kind of happy with. Now, once that's done, then I go back and I start working on leads over the chord progressions. I just load them into the looper. It usually takes me, especially if I'm voicing new chords or voicing chords that I'm unfamiliar with, it usually takes me a few passes to get them in there. But I want to have that experience of now playing lead using some of the forms and phrases that I worked on in the first section in the key that came up in the second session and also with that progression. And this is where it ended up tonight.